The vineyard shimmered beneath golden afternoon light, rows of white chairs lined with orchids, guests in silk and satin murmuring with flutes of champagne in hand. Ethan Langley, dressed in a tailored ivory tuxedo, stood near the altar, rehearsing, his smile as the string quartet played something expensive sounding. It was the wedding of the year. A millionaire tech mogul marrying rising socialite and influencer Marissa Vale. Young, beautiful, impeccably connected. His team had warned him, keep it clean, keep it picture perfect. No scandals this time. He raised his glass to sip champagne, then the murmuring turned. A hush rippled through the crowd. A sleek black limousine crawled up the gravel path and came to a deliberate stop beside the fountain. Cameras swung. Guests turned in their seats. Even the quartet stopped mid-note. The driver opened the door. First one black heel stepped out, then a flash of red silk. A woman emerged, tall, poised, radiant in a floor-length crimson gown that clung with unapologetic grace. Her lipstick matched her dress. Her gaze sliced through the vineyard like glass. Then, 5. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and spread the word and tell us where you're watching from. 5 children, not much older than toddlers. Each in matching white, tiny suits, fluttering dresses, polished shoes. They clustered around her, holding hands, forming a half circle like ducklings following their mother. Ethan's face drained of color. The glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the stone floor. Marissa took a step back, her hand instinctively resting on her stomach. Someone gasped. A whisper swept through the front row. Is that her? Is that his ex-wife? But no one said her name. The woman in red didn't flinch. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply stood there, calm, surrounded by life she'd clearly raised alone. A child tugged at her hem. She bent slightly, whispering something inaudible. The child nodded, and then, just as slowly as she arrived, she began to walk forward, down the center aisle meant for the bride. Not toward the altar, but toward the crowd. Ethan couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't speak. The children trailed behind her like an unspoken sentence, the kind that ends everything. 3 years earlier. Rain clawed at the Langley glass windows, but inside, everything was still. Claire stood in the foyer, barefoot, one hand on her rounding belly, the other clutching the edge of the banister for support. Ethan was already halfway to the door, overnight bag slung over his shoulder, tie undone, no coat. You're not even going to look at me? She asked softly. Ethan didn't turn. I told you I'm not ready for this. You were ready. We planned this. You said you wanted a family. That was before everything got heavy. He finally turned, and for the first time in months, she saw the truth in his eyes. Not fear, not anxiety. Resentment. I'm not built to be chained to a crying infant and a woman who only talks about cribs and formula. Her throat tightened. I'm your wife. He shook his head. Not anymore. He dropped an envelope on the table. Claire's hands trembled as she opened it. Divorce papers. And an NDA, the kind that silences not just stories but souls. I didn't want a public mess, he said, adjusting his cufflinks. I'll be fair. Financially. Ethan, don't make this harder than it has to be. Then he was gone. No goodbye. No apology. Just the soft click of the front door and the echo of her own breath in the empty room. She slid to the floor, clutching her belly, the papers crumpled beneath her knees. She didn't cry. Not then. Not for him. Now, 3 years later, Ethan stood, frozen beneath the vineyard arch, staring at the woman in red. It couldn't be Claire. It shouldn't be Claire, but it was. Same eyes, same quiet strength, except this woman looked nothing like the trembling wife he once left on the floor of their mansion. This woman stood taller, sleeker, sharper, and surrounded by 5 children who, he dared not say it, looked unmistakably like him. His mind raced. Twins? Triplets? No. Quintuplets? It made no sense. She wasn't even showing that far along, he muttered under his breath, staring as she moved past the guests. No ring, no companion. Just a red dress, confidence, and 5 shadows that followed her like fate itself. Ethan, Marissa's voice trembled behind him. He didn't answer, couldn't. He took a single step forward. It can't be her. But it was. Claire didn't flinch, didn't stop, didn't acknowledge him. She walked to a corner seat far from the altar and calmly unzipped a small bag. Juice boxes, a toy, a book. The children sat quietly around her, structured, disciplined, loved. Marissa caught his arm. Who is she? His voice cracked. My wife. The ceremony hadn't started, but no one was watching the altar anymore. They were watching them. 5 small children, perfectly dressed in matching ivory outfits, sitting around the woman in red like petals around a rose. Not one screamed. Not one squirmed. They sipped juice boxes politely, crossed their legs, fixed their little bow ties when they loosened. All 5 had the same deep hazel eyes. Ethan's palms were sweating. 5, he muttered. His father, Gregory Langley, caught his arm and led him a few steps behind the wine station. Are you telling me? Gregory glanced toward Claire. His jaw tensed. She didn't abort them. Ethan blinked. She said she was pregnant with one. Gregory's voice dropped. And you left. You told me to, Ethan snapped, voice low. Gregory didn't deny it. I told you to handle it quietly. I didn't tell you to vanish. They both looked toward Claire again. She sat straight, back regal, calmly dividing snacks into labeled containers. Each child had a name tag. Each one handed their trash back to her when done. They obeyed her like soldiers. But softer. Ethan could barely remember what Claire looked like, crying. That day in the foyer had faded, but this woman, this mother, had eyes that no longer needed forgiveness, just boundaries. The oldest-looking boy leaned toward Claire and whispered something, gesturing toward the altar. She paused. Her hand lightly touched his curls. Then her voice, clear, soft, steady, rose just enough for the guests in front to hear. Yes, sweetheart, that's him. The boy's expression didn't change, but the cameras flashed. Photographers, scenting drama, turned their lenses, first toward the children, then Ethan, then Claire. The video would be viral by morning. Who is she? Whispered someone in the pews. Ex-wife? No, ex-fiancé, technically. Did you see the kids? Marissa stood motionless beside her bridesmaids, white veil half-pinned, mouth dry. She gripped her bouquet like it might shield her from something fatal. Claire hadn't even looked at her. She's not here to fight, Gregory murmured almost to himself. She's here to show she never needed to. The murmurs rippled through the crowd like a slow leak of gas, filling the space with invisible combustion. Ethan tried to steady himself. Quintuplets, hers, his, still alive. He never signed a birth certificate, never knew their names. His lawyers had buried every thread of contact, all under the NDA. And yet, there they were. 5 legacies standing in pressed vests and polished shoes, watching him like strangers. Claire stood up. The children followed. They walked slowly toward the hedge line where a patch of shade offered distance from the crowd. She wasn't leaving. She was simply existing, on her terms. Ethan stared at the red fabric of her dress billow in the breeze. He couldn't breathe. His father touched his shoulder. You thought you erased her. Ethan didn't respond. The truth was louder than shame. He had abandoned them all, and they hadn't just survived. They had arrived. Later that night, after the guests had either quietly slipped out or stayed behind to revel in the scandal, Ethan sat alone in the vineyard's tasting room. The wedding had been canceled. Officially postponed. But everyone knew it was over. Marissa hadn't spoken a word since the limo left. Just tossed her veil into a bush, got into her mother's car, and vanished, leaving only silence and a shattered cake. The hum of the refrigeration unit buzzed faintly behind Ethan as he nursed a glass of wine he couldn't taste. In front of him lay a single envelope delivered by hand just hours ago. No return address, only one word, 5th. He opened it. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten, clean, graceful cursive. If you're reading this, then you've met them. And if you're wondering why there are 5, you're not ready for the answer. Each of them was a decision, a name, a life I chose not to discard when you discarded us. You once said you didn't want to be chained. I understand now. Chains are for prisoners. I gave birth to freedom. Ethan's hand trembled. The handwriting was Claire's. He thought she'd vanish, fade into obscurity after the NDA, the hush money, the legal clean cut. But instead, she wrote letters. He turned the paper over. Another line. You'll find the others when you're ready. Or not. He stood and began pacing the room. How many letters? He muttered. What does she mean by others? Gregory appeared in the doorway, silhouetted against the moonlit hallway. She left one for me, too, the older man said quietly. Ethan turned sharply. When? 2 years ago. I never told you. Gregory handed over a second envelope, aged and yellowed around the corners. His name, Gregory Langley, scrawled across the front. She mailed it to my office, said it was about legacy. I read it once, then locked it in a drawer. He hesitated. She didn't want revenge, she wanted us to know what we lost. Ethan sat again, heavier this time. Do you know their names? He asked. Gregory shook his head. No, but you should learn them. Silence stretched. Finally, Ethan said, I thought the NDA protected me. No, Gregory said. It protected her from you. Ethan clenched the edge of the table. His image, his money, his empire, they had insulated him for years. But 5 children had torn that illusion in a single day. And the letters? They weren't threats. They were reminders that he was no longer the author of the story. Claire was, and she'd chosen paper over courtrooms, ink over anger, 5 letters like 5 heartbeats, echoing louder than any judge. He held the page closer. At the bottom, in smaller writing, you'll find the 6th letter the day you finally say their names. Ethan closed his eyes. He didn't know their names. Not yet. But he would. Gregory Langley had spent a lifetime curating legacies. Buildings bore his name. Art galleries displayed his donations. Entire hospital wings were funded through his endowments. But nothing, not the millions, not the power, prepared him for the day his son asked in a crumbling voice, Dad, did you know? Gregory paused at the question. They were seated in the old wine cellar, candles flickering, walls lined with vintages older than both of them. Yes, he finally said. Ethan stared, blank. How long? I suspected after you walked out on her, but the letter confirmed it. You let me abandon 5 children? Gregory's gaze darkened. No. You did. I gave you power, not permission. Silence settled between them. Heavy. Generational. I was young, Ethan whispered. Gregory shook his head. You were selfish and scared, like I once was. That made Ethan look up. Gregory took a slow sip of wine, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box. There's something you should see. Inside the box lay an old photo. A woman, smiling, auburn hair, holding a newborn baby. The baby had Gregory's eyes. That's not Mom, Ethan said, confused. No, Gregory said softly. It's someone I left behind, long before you were born. Ethan felt the air shift. I was just like you, Gregory continued. Told myself I couldn't be a father, walked away. I thought if I built an empire, the shame would disappear under marble and steel, but it doesn't. He looked at the photo a long time. Claire knew. Gregory added, she found out about her before the wedding. That's why she chose me as godfather in the court papers. What? She gave me legal rights, quietly, privately. If anything ever happened to her, The children would be placed under my protection, not yours. Ethan sat back, stunned. She trusted you more than me. She knew me more than you ever did. The words landed like a punch. Gregory leaned forward. Claire's not seeking revenge, son. She's giving you a chance to understand what family really is. Something I failed to teach you. A long pause. Then Ethan asked, "And if I fail again?" Gregory closed the box. "Then you'll be remembered. The way I fear I will be, as a man who made heirs but never built a family." Upstairs, the faint echo of laughter trickled down from the guest rooms. The Quintuplets. Children Ethan had never named, never met, never held. Gregory stood. "There's still time," he said. "But not much." Ethan didn't reply, but as his father walked away, a single tear traced the path down his cheek, not for himself, but for what had never been passed down. Ethan lingered outside the guest wing, heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He could hear them, 5 tiny voices, giggling behind a cracked door. One voice louder than the others, correcting a sibling's pronunciation. Another humming softly, all unaware of the man on the other side. Claire was inside with them. She hadn't spoken to him, not a word, not since stepping out of that limo. But somehow, she knew he'd come. The door was ajar. He knocked. The room fell silent. Claire opened the door just enough for her face to appear. No makeup, no pretense, just tired eyes and composure carved from stone. "I want to know their names," Ethan said quietly. Claire stared at him, unreadable. "Now you care?" His voice cracked. "I don't have an excuse, just tell me." She stepped aside, allowing him into the room. The children stared at him with curiosity, not fear. Claire motioned for them to keep playing, and they returned to their toys. Blocks, picture books, a stuffed turtle missing one eye. She sat in the corner chair, arms folded. "You never asked once in 3 years. Not even when the divorce papers included prenatal records. I didn't know they survived. You didn't want to." Silence. Then with a steady voice she began. "That's Ava," she said, pointing to the girl with the crayon tucked behind her ear. "She loves to draw. She's always drawing flowers, things that grow." "Ava," Ethan repeated softly. Next to her is Leo. He's the oldest by 2 minutes, obsessed with space. The boy turned, beamed at him, and waved a little plastic rocket. Claire continued, her voice growing gentler with each name. "That's Isla with the curls. She doesn't talk much, but she hears everything, and next to her, Owen, always asking questions, always fixing things." Ethan looked toward the last child, quietly humming in the corner. "And the one singing?" he asked. Claire's gaze softened, just slightly. "Her name is Hope." The word hit him like a punch to the ribs. "You named her Hope?" "I named all of them after what I needed to survive you." Ethan turned to the children. "Do they know about me?" Claire stood. "They know their mother loved them enough for 2 parents. That's all they need right now." He nodded, swallowed, the lump in his throat. "Can I sit?" She hesitated, then nodded. He knelt near the carpet, awkward and unsure. Ava handed him a drawing, 5 stick figures holding hands. One larger figure stood off to the side, arms outstretched. "Is that me?" he asked. Ava shrugged. "We were just guessing." Claire watched from her corner, arms still crossed, eyes unreadable. Ethan looked at her. "Why didn't you tell the world sooner?" "Because I wanted them to grow up without your shadow, until they were strong enough to walk through it." He didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Just 5 names echoing through his mind like the verses of a hymn he'd forgotten how to sing. Ava, Leo, Isla, Owen, Hope. He wouldn't forget them again. Sienna stood at the edge of the ballroom terrace, her manicured fingers tightening around the stem of a champagne flute. She hadn't spoken to Ethan since the moment Claire arrived. The crowd whispered behind folded programs and clutched pearls. The ceremony was delayed, but no one dared to ask why. She watched Ethan through the glass. He was kneeling beside a group of children, 5 of them. Claire stood quietly nearby, her presence like a stone dropped into a still lake. Ripples were forming. Nothing would be the same. Sienna turned back to her reflection in the window. White lace gown, perfect curls, flawless skin. But something was cracking underneath. When Ethan finally stepped outside, she didn't wait for him to speak. "So," she said with a tight smile, "how long were you planning to tell me?" Ethan looked startled. "I didn't know. Don't lie to me." He ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't know about the kids. I knew Claire was pregnant when I left. But I thought she'd taken care of it." Sienna laughed, but it was brittle. "By taking care of it, you mean you assumed she got rid of them?" He didn't answer. She stepped forward, her voice low. "You left a woman pregnant and never looked back. And now she shows up with your children. 5 of them on our wedding day. That's not just a twist, Ethan, that's a reckoning. I didn't ask for this." "No," she said, "but you made it." The silence between them stretched. Behind the glass, the children laughed. Claire bent to tie a shoelace. Even in that mundane gesture, there was something powerful, something maternal and unshaken. Sienna's eyes didn't leave Claire. "Did you love her?" Ethan hesitated. "Yes, once." "And me?" He looked at her. "I do." "No," she said, stepping back. "You love the idea of me. The clean start, the unbroken life, the woman who didn't bleed for you." Her voice was calm, but it cut like glass. Inside, a wedding planner peeked nervously from behind a curtain, awaiting instructions. Sienna turned to the view of the vineyard. Sunset burning over rows of grapevines, a beauty that felt cruel now. "I spent months planning this wedding," she said softly. "The dress, the press, the menu. But I forgot one thing." "What?" "To check if the groom had a conscience." Ethan's shoulders sank. "What do you want me to do?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "I want you to go back inside. I want you to face what you left. Because no matter what happens next, I won't be marrying a man who flinches at truth." Then she handed him the ring. Not angrily, not with drama, just quietly. He stared at it. The diamond that once symbolized a future now looked heavy in his palm. "I'll speak to the guests," Sienna said, walking past him. "You deal with the mother of your children." As she disappeared through the French doors, her smile returned, elegant, icy, and bulletproof. But Ethan? He remained on the terrace, alone with the ring and 5 names echoing like bells in the back of his mind. The guests buzzed upstairs, distracted by speculation and Prosecco, but Ethan moved like a ghost through the winding stone corridor beneath the vineyard estate, where dim lights flickered over dusty wine bottles older than his regrets. Claire was already waiting in the cellar. She stood beside an oak barrel, her red dress now shadowed in the dim glow, the train trailing across cracked stone. The Quintuplets were upstairs with a nanny Sienna had quietly summoned. There would be no more distractions. "Nice venue," Claire said flatly, eyes scanning the racks. "Expensive." Ethan approached cautiously. "You shouldn't have come." "No," she said. "You shouldn't have left." The silence between them wasn't cold. It was volcanic, bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to explode. "I didn't know," Ethan whispered. "That you had them. That they survived." Claire laughed, one sharp note. "Of course you didn't. You were too busy playing Bachelor of the Year in the tabloids." He lowered his gaze. "You could have told me. You could have stayed." She took a slow step forward, arms crossed, voice steady. "Do you want to know what it was like giving birth alone? 5 babies, Ethan. They couldn't even all cry at once. They were too weak. I named them while holding a pen with shaking fingers." His throat tightened. "I thought you'd aborted?" She finished for him. "No. I don't destroy what I love, even if the father did." The cellar felt like a confessional, too small for their history, Too dark for lies. I'm not here for revenge, Claire said. I don't want your money, or your pity. Then why? Because someday those children will ask me where you were. He winced, and I need to be able to say with truth in my voice that I gave you the chance to show up. Ethan exhaled slowly. I don't know if I can be what they need. They don't need you to be anything, she said, tone clipped. They already have me. The weight of that sentence landed like a gavel. He nodded slowly. They look strong. They are. Do they know who I am? Claire stepped closer, eyes piercing. One asked me, just this week, why some fathers choose to leave. I told him, some people mistake fear for freedom. Ethan looked away, ashamed. She placed a folded piece of paper on the barrel. This is their names, birthdays, medical info. I won't block you if you want to be involved, truly involved. But they don't need another man who shows up just to soothe his guilt. He stared at the paper but didn't touch it. Claire walked to the stairwell door, then paused. You know what hurt most? She asked. He didn't answer. That it wasn't a clean break. You sent me a non-disclosure agreement. You tried to erase me. Ethan closed his eyes. I was scared. She nodded once. So was I just didn't run. And then she was gone, heels clicking against the stone floor, fading like a heartbeat. Ethan remained in the cellar, holding the silence like it was glass, fragile, reflective, unforgiving. He looked at the note again. 5 names, all his. Upstairs, the ceremony had been stalled under the weight of gossip and champagne. Guests whispered. The bride, Sienna, paced in her suite with a glass of rosé and a look in her eyes that said she wasn't as clueless as she pretended to be. Ethan stood before the mirror in the groom's chamber, staring at his reflection. The collar of his shirt was soaked with sweat. In his hand, the wedding band, a custom platinum circle he'd once thought symbolized a clean new beginning. It felt cold now, artificial, like it belonged to someone else's life. The music began. The coordinator called his name. He straightened his jacket and walked out one step at a time, like a man approaching a courtroom instead of an altar. Sienna met him under the canopy of white roses, her smile stretched like porcelain. The officiant cleared his throat. Guests hushed. Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd. Claire wasn't there. The quintuplets were gone too, but their absence was louder than the violins. The officiant began the formalities. Then came the moment. Do you, Ethan Langley, take... I'm sorry, Ethan said aloud. Gasps scattered through the crowd. The officiant blinked. Excuse me? Ethan turned to Sienna, voice firm but hushed. I can't do this. The silence was immediate, like the air itself froze. Sienna's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? I thought I was starting over, he said, more to himself than her. But I've just been running. From the truth. From the family I already have. Sienna dropped her bouquet. Somewhere in the back, a camera clicked. I have children, Sienna, Ethan continued. And I abandoned them before they even had names. I saw them today, and for the first time in years I saw myself. The officiant stepped back. No one breathed. Sienna's voice was razor sharp. You're embarrassing me. I've embarrassed myself for 3 years, he said, voice shaking. But I won't build a life on a lie, not again. He pulled the ring from his pocket, held it between his fingers, looked at it like it was a relic of a past self he no longer recognized. It doesn't fit, he whispered. He placed the ring gently on the podium and stepped down. Gasps turned into murmurs. Someone dropped a glass. Ethan didn't stop. Outside, the vineyard wind blew hard. Paparazzi turned their cameras toward the drama, but Ethan ignored them. His steps were steady now, purposeful. For once, he wasn't walking away from something. He was walking toward it. The sun was low when Ethan pulled up in a rented SUV to a quiet suburban street. No mansion, no gate. Just a weathered blue house with daffodils blooming by the mailbox. He hadn't called. He didn't know if he was welcome. But he was there. The front yard was littered with sidewalk chalk drawings, stars, rockets, a crooked sun smiling with too many teeth. A red tricycle lay overturned in the grass. It looked nothing like the world he'd built for himself. And, yet, it felt more real than anything he owned. He stood on the porch for a long time before knocking. Claire opened the door, still in a t-shirt and jeans, no makeup. Behind her, laughter echoed from somewhere down the hall. She didn't smile, but she didn't close the door either. "I walked out of the wedding," Ethan said. Claire blinked once. "I know." "You already heard?" She stepped aside. "You're trending." He gave a weak, ironic smile. "Of course." Inside, the walls were covered in finger-painted art, growth charts, and tiny handprints dated with birthdays. The smell of warm tomato soup filled the air. "They're in the playroom," Claire said softly. He followed her to a small room glowing with late afternoon light. 5 tiny beds were lined against the far wall, each with its own name above the headboard, each decorated differently: space, dinosaurs, ballerinas, trucks, and books. A 6th bed, smaller, sat in the corner with a folded blanket. He stood there. "Silent, I kept them together," Claire said from behind him. "Everyone told me to split them into foster homes, said it would be easier, but I couldn't." Ethan's voice cracked. "You did this alone?" "No," she said. "Not alone. I had them." The children's giggles rang through the hallway, like wind chimes. One shouted something about a rocket launcher. Ethan turned, tears welling. "I want to know them." Claire crossed her arms. "Knowing them isn't the same as deserving them." "I know." "I don't need co-parenting," she said. "Not unless it's real. Not unless it's earned." He nodded. "Then let me start earning it, from wherever you'll let me stand." Claire hesitated, then pointed toward the kitchen. "There's dishes in the sink, soup's cooling on the stove. The twins hate crusts on their sandwiches, and the little one with curls bites if he's overtired." Ethan blinked. Claire shrugged. "That's where fathers start, right?" Ethan moved quietly to the kitchen and rolled up his sleeves. As he washed plates and wiped the counter, one of the boys peeked around the doorway, watching him. Ethan smiled. "Hey, buddy." The boy tilted his head. "Are you the man who made Mommy cry?" Ethan's heart twisted. "Yes," he said. "But I'm trying to be the man who makes her smile again." The boy studied him for a long moment, then walked away, without fear, without words. Just a child deciding for himself. Later, Ethan sat in the room with 6 beds, listening to the sound of breathing. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't belong there yet, but the 6th bed had a fresh blanket now. The town's small community hall hadn't seen a full crowd in years, not since the last 4th of July potluck. But today people gathered in folding chairs with kids fidgeting in laps and neighbors murmuring in curiosity. A charity auction was being held for the local school. Claire had organized it. Ethan stood near the back, unsure if he was allowed to be there. Claire hadn't asked him to come, and she hadn't told him not to. She hadn't said anything at all since the night he left soup-stained dishes in her sink and tucked a blanket into a 6th bed. But this time, he brought something besides silence. She stood on stage, poised and calm, introducing raffle baskets and thanking sponsors. The Quintuplets sat in a row, slightly disheveled but polite, wearing handmade name tags. They didn't call him Dad. They didn't call him anything yet. When Claire opened the floor for closing remarks, Ethan stepped forward. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polished. But it was time. "May I?" he asked. Claire looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single, careful nod. Ethan took the microphone. The room quieted. "My name is Ethan Langley," he said. "Some of you might know me for the wrong reasons. Some of you might only know me as the man who left." He scanned the crowd. No one moved. "I made a vow once, to love and protect someone. But I never said it in front of people. I said it in private, with conditions, with contracts, with clauses. I failed her. And I failed 5 hearts who didn't ask to be born into a courtroom." Claire looked down. The children were silent. So today, Ethan continued, his voice breaking. I want to say what I should have said 3 years ago, not to win her back, not to be applauded, but because some vows matter more after the ceremony is gone. He turned to Claire and looked her in the eyes. I vow to never disappear, again, not in fear, not in pride, not in silence. I vow to be the kind of man they look up to, even if they never call me Dad. I vow to earn every second of trust I shattered. He paused, swallowed, then added softly, and I vow to never let money make me feel bigger than the people I love. A hush fell. Not applause, just breath held in stillness. Claire stood. Her eyes glistened, but her face was unreadable. She walked to the stage and took the mic from his hands. She didn't speak. She reached into her pocket and held up something small, a folded photo. The first ultrasound, yellowed and worn. She passed it to Ethan without a word. He held it like glass. The crowd still didn't clap, but they understood. That night, after, the crowd cleared and the chairs were folded away, Ethan carried sleeping bodies to their beds, one by one, 5 sets of limbs, 5 dreams he wasn't part of, but hoped to be. When he returned downstairs, Claire stood at the door. You forgot. One? She handed him the folded blanket for the 6th bed. Ethan smiled, tears in his eyes. Right, still learning. Claire nodded. Keep learning. And she left the porch light on. The kitchen smelled of toast and crayons. It had been a week since the charity event, and Ethan still didn't know where he stood. He came by each morning, helped with breakfast, took the kids to school, repaired a broken stair rail, folded tiny socks with clumsy fingers. He didn't stay overnight. That line hadn't been crossed. Claire didn't offer answers, and Ethan didn't ask until he saw it. The new family photograph pinned to the fridge. Claire stood in the center, radiant in her red dress, flanked by the Quintuplets. The kids beamed wildly. A local photographer must have captured it during the fundraiser, but something was missing. His place. There was an empty space on the right side, just beside the youngest boy's shoulder. Space for one more person. And yet, not him. He wasn't. In the shot, not cropped, not forgotten, excluded, not by mistake, by choice. He stared at the photo for a long time, then noticed a note pinned beside it. Claire's handwriting, neat and small. A family isn't made by weddings. It's made by staying. He turned to find her behind him, arms folded. Calm, not cold. You took that photo the day I spoke, didn't you? Claire nodded. It wasn't about you, it was about us, the 6 of us. He let that sink in. I wanted to believe that speech fixed everything, he said quietly. But you're right. Words don't raise kids. No, she replied. But presence does. He lowered his gaze. Do I belong here? Claire stepped forward, opened a drawer, and pulled out a simple wooden picture frame. She handed it to him. The photo's not finished, she said. Neither are you. Ethan blinked. I want you to earn it. Not with guilt, not with money, with days, with pancakes, with picking up sick kids from school, with showing up even when no one claps. He held the frame, carefully, like it weighed more than wood and glass. Then softly one of the children appeared in the doorway. The smallest one, Leo, the one with the stuffed elephant. Mommy, he mumbled. He forgot his tie. The boy pointed at Ethan, then toddled, off, leaving behind a wrinkled clip-on in Ethan's size. Claire arched an eyebrow. Apparently someone thinks you're going to the school play. I am, Ethan said, stunned. I mean, I'd like to. She nodded. Then go. But remember, it's not about who claps for you on stage. It's about who notices when you're not in the audience. Ethan looked down at the frame again. I'll come back, he said. Every day if I'm allowed. Claire gave him a long look. Then at last, the ghost of a smile. Then maybe one day, she said, you'll be in the picture. As the morning light filtered in through the window, catching dust and dreams in its path, Ethan slid the frame under his arm and followed the sound of small feet down the hallway. And outside, for the first time in years, the porch light turned off. He no longer needed it to find his way home.